welcome everybody to the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging workshop. This is the Practitioners for Change virtual learning series. This one in particular is the Practitioner Wellbeing series. And so today we're going to be talking about navigating uncertainty and avoiding burnout. Mostly we're going to be talking about stress because that's what ends up happening, right? Uncertainty breeds stress. That unmanaged stress becomes burnout. So my name is Xander Kegg, and I'm your facilitator, and I'm going to be introducing myself in the next slide. Here you go. So a little bit more about me. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a trans man. I live in Orlando. My wife and I are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year in September. I am, yeah, you can see it. It's all there on the slide. Don't need to reiterate too much. Just so you know who I am a member of the community. I'm a former employee of Out and Equal back in the day. I think it was like 2006, 2007. I've been part of LGBT community since I came out when I was 14. I'll be 56 next month. So a lot of time in the community, mostly lesbian community. And then for the last 20 years, the trans community. Thank you for the anniversary wishes. I appreciate it. So the Practitioner Wellbeing series has been going on now for the last few months now. So we started out with trauma-informed workplace. We went on to strengthening emotional intelligence, cultivating mental fitness. Last time we got together 2 weeks ago, we talked about the 5 styles of conflict management, which, to reiterate, are avoiding, accommodating, competing, compromising, and collaborating. I know that there's some information on the Out and Equal website where you can look at more details about that. But today we're going to be talking about navigating uncertainty and dealing with burnout. So when we have difficult thoughts or we're coping with strong emotions, when we are dealing with just stressful events in our life, personally, professionally, globally, regionally, in whatever ways, there's lots of different ways we're being impacted. It can all be very overwhelming. And so the uncertainty piece of this is basically, we don't know what's going to happen from minute to minute sometimes, and that's very unsettling for a lot of people. And that breeds a lot of stress, right? We have stressors in our lives, and then this is an additional layer of stress that comes into our life. And if we don't get a handle on the stress, then it leads to burnout. And so I'll talk to you a little bit more about burnout. But stress is basically our body's reaction to letting us know that we are having stress in our lives, right? It's as simple as that. And so I'm going to be showing you some slides talking to you a little bit more about stress. That's going to be the main focus of this workshop, since it's one of those things that so many people are dealing with. And I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's simple to put in some tools and strategies into practice to be able to get a handle on the stress, how it's impacting our physical body and our mental well-being as well. I always like to start out my sessions with a mindfulness practice. I like to do breathing. This little object that you're seeing on your screen right now, this blue ball, you'll noticing it's getting smaller, and then it's going to hold, and then it's going to get bigger again, and then it's going to hold. And what this is showing us is to breathe in, right? And then you hold your breath until you start seeing it go smaller, which is when you start letting your breath out. And now you hold your breath. So let's exhale and get ready to breathe in with the circle. Let's do 2 rounds. Let's do 1 more. All right. That is called box breathing. And I'm going to put a link into the chat box so everybody can have this fancy little blue ball. Box breathing. How are you feeling now? How was that? How was it just doing 3 rounds of box breathing? You can use the chat box again, send it to everyone or just to me. Relaxing, good, excellent. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. And so you can do that as many times as you want. You can bring this up, bookmark it, use this image. That way you don't have to, that way you don't have to count or focus. You just watch the blue ball get bigger and smaller. I'm glad people are enjoying it. So I mentioned burnout. So let's talk a little bit about burnout. So what is it? And so here's the definition of burnout from the World Health Organization, which is deemed burnout now is considered an occupational hazard. So that's pretty serious, right? So burnout is the physical and mental exhaustion, a sense of dread about work, and frequent feelings of cynicism, anger, or irritability. These are the key signs of burnout, right? So the term burnout was coined about half century ago, and it was used to describe these issues of cynicism and exhaustion and feeling ineffective, right? Feeling ineffective. And they were noticing it back then, mostly in people that were considered human services professionals, like doctors, police officers, social workers. We might now call some of them first responders, right? But it's showing up now in many, many different occupational fields. It's showing up in people that are spending most of their time maybe working in the home even, because people can become burned out through parenting, through caregiving for elderly parents. My father has dementia. I'm a caregiver. It's a lot of work, physically, mentally, right? It takes its toll. So some of the causes of burnout you can see there on the screen is feeling out of control. That uncertainty piece plays a factor in that, feeling out of control, whether it's at work and or at home. Being asked to complete tasks, right, that conflict with your sense of self. This is called like moral injury or interpersonal injury. This happens a lot for people. You're being asked to do something, or you're being denied the ability to do something, and it violates your own sense of self, your values, your morals, whatever your compass is. I'm just going to remind people to please, if you could mute yourself. I'm hearing some background noise, some static and some move. Thank you so much. I'm still, maybe Q from Out and Equals with us in the background, if they could mute people. Thank you, Q. So there are different ways that we can be dealing with burnout. You can see some of those there on the slide about, speaking up about your concerns with people, nurturing your relationships with people, also saying no to new tasks. That's called boundary setting. And we're going to be talking about that at the very end, actually, during the self-care section. So again, I'll go back to saying this: asking to complete tasks or being denied the ability to complete tasks because it violates your values, your core values, your worldview, your religion, whatever it is, right? Your moral compass. So this is what burnout is. And burnout happens, right? There are precursors to burnout, right? There's stress, there's compassion fatigue, there's certain layers that kind of come before burnout. Burnout is when you've had enough. And most people, this is when they're quitting their jobs. This is when they're moving. This is when people are doing a lot of things to try and get away from the situation. But if we don't learn how to actually deal with burnout, it'll just follow us. It'll happen again in the next town, in the next job, in the next relationship, because there is a skill set that we could apply, that we could be using, that we could avoid getting to burnout, right? Burnout is not inevitable. We don't all get there. We don't have to get there. So let's do a little bit of activity here with the chat box. You can send this to everyone or click that little down arrow and send it just to me, the host. I just like to, what causes you the most stress? Use as few words as possible. Get as clear as you can, because the ability to name what you're feeling is the way to start to resolve it. Finances, too many meetings, yep, powerlessness, family, micromanagement, yeah, different kinds of pressures for work, time management, yeah. So a lot of similarities, because I'm getting them both to everyone and to myself. Health issues, state of the country, yeah. Trying to meet everyone, yeah, okay. So we're going to come back to this. There's going to be a discussion portion where people are going to be going into breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to discuss for a few moments something about a stress management technique that's going to relate to this. So keep this in mind. Keep in mind what your answer was, if you want to maybe write it down so that you have it during the discussion portion. So let's look at stress. So here are the signs of stress. So these are things that you can be paying attention to for yourself, but also the people around you, right? The people you care about and love, your friends, your peers, your family, your colleagues, right? Your children, whomever. So a decrease in motivation. So what this might look like is all of a sudden you're having difficulty finishing your basic tasks, things that you normally had no problem with, but now you're lacking motivation. Changes in your mood, right? If there's mood fluctuation and that's unusual for you. Some people have mood fluctuation on a regular basis. If you do not, that is a sign of stress. Changes in sleep and energy. So that's maybe the inability to get to sleep, stay asleep, go back to sleep. So paying attention to sleep is really important. And I've touched on this topic, I think in every one of these sessions, because it really is foundational to all of this. If we're not getting good sleep, meaning if our circadian rhythm isn't regulated, neither is our appetite, our blood sugar levels, our moods, our endocrine system, our immune response system. So sleep is really integral to this. So Why We Sleep is a wonderful book to read, can give you some really good techniques. Looking up on the internet, sleep hygiene is another way to do it. Go back on the Out and Equal website. Maybe Q will drop the link to some of the previous sessions where I've also talked about sleep, so you can get some good tools and strategies. Any changes in functioning, right? Like, again, you have the decrease in motivation, so you're not finishing tasks, but it's also changing the function and your ability to actually complete these tasks. Not that it's not on time, it's that you're just having trouble doing them at all, right? And then there's also withdrawal, right? So a lot of us are maybe more separate from people right now, physically or socially. We're separated still in a lot of places, but isolating and withdrawing is taking that extra step and cutting people out of our lives and disconnecting from them. We're tribal, right? We're tribal people. We need to be connected to others. It might be more difficult to find people you can feel connected to. That's why I'm glad you're here, because you're going to be in a breakout room and hopefully you'll feel connected for a brief period of time there. And there are other opportunities to do that. Just takes a little more effort to find them, especially nowadays. And then changes in thoughts and behaviors, right? So all of a sudden you're worrying more than you usually do. You have higher fear level, you're anxious more, right? It's like, this isn't somebody who has like generalized anxiety disorder. This is somebody who is normally pretty happy-go-lucky and they're filled with anxiety, right? That's the difference, right? So these kinds of changes you can notice in yourself, but you can also notice in your friends and your family members and coworkers. Yeah, Q's saying one of the last sessions where we discussed importance of sleep was mental fitness. Thank you. Absolutely. Go check that out. So these are the signs of stress, right? But I want to also show you how stress impacts our physical bodies, right? So you can see there on the slide that it impacts us in so many ways. It's making our muscles tense, which is constricting our blood flow, and it's making our immune system doesn't respond as well. It gets our heart rate going. I mean, it does a lot of things, right? So stress impacts our physical body in ways that can be detrimental, especially if we're in a constant state of stress. If we're in a constant unmanaged state of stress, these physical sensations are going to become symptoms, right, of some sort of illness, condition, disorder. And what we most often find ourselves in is this fight or flight or freeze or fawn. Most people are not familiar with fawn, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Most people know what fight or flight or freeze is. Fawn is people pleasing. It's becoming the family, clown or entertainer, because it's the only way you can get everybody to calm down in the house or pay attention to you, right? So if you're under stress when you're a kid and your goal is to bring everybody together by making them laugh or bring them together by entertaining them, that's the fawn response to stress. I'm not talking about people who are just love to perform and the family is always paying attention to you and you're just performing. This is a stress response, right? So how this might show up for you is in your emotions, right? Fear, anxiety, shame, irritability, hopelessness, guilt, right? That's how you might be feeling emotionally if you're under a lot of stress. Some of the behaviors that you might notice about yourself and others is being short with others, meaning, right, kind of snapping at people, overworking. That can be at home, at work, or in the gym. Overworking your body can be a sign of stress, right? Too much time in the gym can be unhealthy, actually, because you're going to hurt your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments. Procrastinating, abusing substances, isolating from people, and then people pleasing, right? That's that fawn response. So the mind part of this, how we might be mentally responding to stress, is we might notice that we're having difficulty concentrating, following instructions, or remembering things, especially important things, things that matter. We might also start blaming ourselves, thinking that we're a failure, we're no good, and we start having suicidal thoughts. Or we might blame other people. Everyone else is responsible. That doesn't mean that there aren't people out in the world doing things you don't like, but blaming them will not help you resolve how the stress is impacting your body and your mind and your life, right? Your functionability. What's this say? It says overly, overly quiet instead of snapping. Yeah, absolutely. That's that withdrawing or isolating. Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that point up. So that's how we respond to stress, right? So this is like talking about signs of stress. This is how we respond to stress. Let's talk a little bit about now managing stress. So you can see on that image there that there's such a thing as like a level of stress, and then you hit a tipping point, and then it starts to go over, right? And so we want a healthy amount of stress in our lives to motivate us and keep us on the right path, doing the right things, right? That's why they say like a little bit of shame, a little bit of guilt, a little bit of stress. It keeps us honest and it keeps us moving forward. But when we get to that point where it starts to go over, that's when we're tipping over towards compassion fatigue and heading down into burnout. Right. And so there's a relationship between stress and performance, which is why I'm talking about it here, because, you're in the workplace. And so the way that stress impacts your ability to perform in your job is going to be really important. And so there are lots of tools and strategies that we can use to manage our stress. Getting a good night's sleep is one of them. Mindfulness practices is another. Being able to just identify what is causing you the stress. Are there things that you can do in your life to mitigate those? Or can you lessen them? Can you get away from them entirely? If not, what can you do to sort of mediate those stressors? Recognizing that we all have what's called a threat detection system or a limbic system in our brain that registers and sends those signals of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. What we have to pay attention to is if we're getting that signal all the time, we might be dysregulated in our ability to recognize when we're actually under threat and when we're not, right? So oftentimes people will elevate discomfort or distress to threat. And so, you might hear a lot of that in our community, elevating hearing words to equating to being violence. So if the limbic system, the threat detection system in your brain, is associating words with violence, and your brain remembers you experiencing violence, you're going to have a response to those words as if it was a violent act. But of course, words are not violence. And we have the ability to navigate through that distress and regulate those emotions. I've talked about that in some other series. That doesn't mean that we don't like what people are saying and that we let people say whatever they want to say, but we can take care of ourselves first and then handle the situation second. Dealing with difficult thoughts. I talked about that in prior sessions too. We can reframe the thoughts that are in our mind. That's called cognitive reframing. A lot of people who go into therapy with a cognitive behavioral therapist learn all about how to reframe their thoughts and how to reframe the cognitive distortions that we have in our mind. And so there's a whole lot on that. I can't go into the details. That's a whole nother session on how to recognize our own cognitive distortions and our learned helplessness. That's a very common way that people deal with stress, is to become helpless. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it. Well, also one last thing about this would be cultivating work-life balance, right? Being able to, and boundary setting, we're going to talk about that, has a lot to do with this, right? A work-life balance. Barbara's saying proper nutrition and low alcohol. Sure, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. The low alcohol, but not before bed. It turns out alcohol disrupts REM sleep, which is the most important cycle of sleep for cognitive repairs. So not before bed. And that's when a lot of people do that kind of thing. So good reinforcement there. All right. So I said that we're going to go into discussion groups. I want to also mention that sometimes people don't like to go into the discussion group. So you're going to be offered an opportunity to go into a discussion group, and you can just hit no or ignore it or whatever you need to do. And you can stay with me in the larger room, and we'll use the chat box to communicate your response to the prompt, which you'll see on the next slide. But before we do that, just want to go over the discussion agreements, right? So the discussion agreements for this breakout room is that we respect, each other, that we each take responsibility for our own learning, that we are open to considering other people's thoughts and ideas and opinions, that we actively participate, which is why some people would prefer to stay in the big room using chat than go into the discussion room. Which we want to honor, that we listen to other people, right? I want to be heard, you probably want to be heard, so the people that are talking also want to be heard. So in addition to listening to people, I'm going to recommend, and I'm going to request that you also don't pay attention to any notifications coming in on your phone, any tabs that are popping up on your computer screen. Like, really try to be present for the individuals that are in the breakout room with you. Also, to ask any questions that could lead to greater awareness. Please make sure that people are open to being asked questions before you ask the question. So you can ask the question if they're okay to you asking a question. And then let's also keep the highest level of confidentiality and privacy. So in this setting, of course, we can't guarantee it because there's people, from all over the world that are here. But what I hope you can do is talk about any topic that comes up in this session. Please just don't attribute it to a particular person who lives in a particular place and works at a particular employer, because that might come up in your small groups. So hold on, I do see something coming through. Thank you so much for that accommodation. We'll be needing to jump off for another meeting shortly, so being in a small group discussion would be awkward. Absolutely. Thank you for letting us know, and you're very welcome. Okay, so here is the prompt for the discussion groups. So remember, I asked you in the beginning, what is the thing that stresses you out the most, right? What are you the most stressed about? Try and get as specific, as concise as you can about that, because what I want you to think about is, how are you coping with that stress, right? And so you might be coping with it in a way that is not in your best interest, right? So I talked a little bit about how stress manifests in the body, the ways in which stress might be manifesting us in our functionality, in how we're engaging with other people. And so the way you're coping with stress, is it working? Could you do something differently? And what would that be, right? What would be the alternative coping mechanism to handle the stress that you feel you're currently under that's causing you the most stress? Right? What causes you the most stress? So not a laundry list of all the things that are causing you stress. What is the most stressful thing in your life right now? And so I want you to discuss the ways that you cope with stress. And then I want you to talk about, like, is sleep a priority for you? Are you integrating mindfulness into your day? Are you challenging your unhelpful thoughts that come up when you're thinking about this stressful situation? And yeah, so that's what I'd like you to do in those discussion groups. Now, basically, so I gave you a list of things that were like ways you could manage stress, like work-life balance. But oftentimes we feel hijacked by our emotions, right? Just to reiterate something I said a little bit ago, we feel hijacked by them. So putting in all these coping mechanisms, you're going to share those with each other, and hopefully you'll be able to support each other in generating some new coping mechanisms. Yeah, so any questions at all about what you're going to be doing before you get sent off into your breakout groups? This is going to be about 5 minutes in your breakout groups. And then when we come back, any questions at all about that? So I think we have enough time. Have you already set up the time frame for the just breakout rooms?
No, they can be for any time.
What do you think if we did maybe 6 or 7 minutes?
Yeah, sounds great.
It's a heavy topic. I want to be able to give people enough time, and then everybody will come back, and then I'll do some wrap up, but I'll ask you how this experience that you're going into was for you. So let's do 6 minutes. Let's give people just a little bit more time. And so again, you'll get the invite to go to a group. If you want to stay with me, just disregard that. And I'll see you back here in 6 minutes. Thank you, Q. So I'll wait until I see the numbers start going down for people who are going into groups. Once it settles, then those of us who are remaining can have our own conversation in the chat box. How do you usually cope with stress, and what are some other ways that maybe you could be coping with your stress? So that's still going down. Let me see. Let's wait a little bit. Not too long, because I want everybody to have the same opportunity. I think people are selecting where they're going. So let's go ahead and let's use the chat box. So please put into the chat box, how do you usually cope with stress? And what are some ways that some new coping mechanisms or strategies that you feel like you could integrate into your life to help you manage your stress better? Saying one thing I've talked about with my team is that stress does not equal burnout, but you cannot get burned out without being stressed. Absolutely. Thanks for that. Dealing with stress, try to get outside for a walk or sit down with a good book. Great. Now, usually that's a short-term fix, right? That's not long-term. Do you find that that's true for you? That's short-term, but not long-term, or does it work long-term? Garden, roam around the yard, barefoot, excellent. Venting. Do you find that that's helpful and people are willing to listen to you vent over, like in a repeated fashion? People are running healthy and unhealthy ways, self-care books, listening to music, talking to someone, eating a special diet, dancing, singing, showing compassion. Great. So bury it. Yeah, compartmentalization, that's very common. And that's not an unsuccessful strategy. It's just not a good long-term one, right? Because eventually things either build up on our bodies or on our brains, like mentally or both, and then we have to do something, right? Making time with friends, queen of compartmentalizing. Yeah, how to stay ahead. So maybe the boundary setting might be good. We'll see. The staying ahead of it is incorporating things like the mindfulness practices, stretching, breathing, guided meditation. The progressive muscle relaxation is a good technique where you tighten and release all of the muscles in your body in sections. Better, yeah. You'd like to be better at setting boundaries, or you are getting better. Making lists, focus on where the issue falls, control, influence, concern, absolutely. Right, that's a really helpful thing to recognize is what can we actually control? Not a lot, it turns out most of the time, except we have one thing we can always control, and that's us, our reaction to things. We can always control that, but it's harder to control our reaction to things if we haven't cultivated some practices into our life, some coping mechanisms, some strategies that we can call on immediately, like a grounding technique or a breathing technique, something that we can do in the instant to pull ourselves out of whatever is distressing us and gives us the opportunity to get a distance from it. And therefore we can figure out, like, how am I going to respond to this rather than reacting? Yeah, the natural reaction to obsess about it, giving yourself time frames. Have you already looked into this idea of scheduling worry times? Have you done that? Scheduling a worry time? Look that up on the internet if that's not something you've already looked into. Scheduling worry times. It turns out to be really, really helpful for a lot of people. Scheduling a worry time. Yeah, yeah. You schedule it. Absolutely. Let it sit. That's right. Somebody's saying they'd be worried about missing their worried time. Yeah, you got to put that on the list then. That's something you would worry about during your worry time. Yeah, current climate, very stressful. Instead of doom scrolling and obsessing, taking small actions, donating causes, digital volunteering, help where you can. Give yourself space to know. Absolutely. Zero tasking. Another thing you can do is, somebody like talk about going out for walks, going into the garden, running. One of the pieces of that a lot of people are not familiar with, it was I think 2 sessions ago, I talked about fractals. When we go out into nature, the repetitive pattern of the leaves on the trees, the branches on the trees, the buildings in downtown or whatever, that actually sends a signal into our brain, and it reduces our stress by 60%. So getting out and exposing yourself to fractals, the link that Q put in a little while ago to the series, there were a whole bunch of links that I provided to people about how to get more fractals into your life. We have 1 minute left. Thank you, Q. Sports teams, fantastic. That's right. It gets you active and also out of your head. That's right. Yeah, this overthinking, right? Because when we're stressed, we're trying to solve it, right? Solve. And that's not the problem, right? Why wouldn't we want to solve what's stressing us out? It's maybe how much time we spend on that, and also the internal dialogue we might have with ourselves in the process of trying to solve things by sort of turning in on ourselves, what an idiot, you're such a jerk, or, those kinds of things that people do. Or just channeling it outside and saying, everything be perfect in my life if everybody else just did what I wanted them to do, which is never going to happen. So we got to figure out a way in between those things. Exercising the dog. Thank you, Q. So people are coming back now. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. Welcome back. Welcome back. People are coming back into the room. So how was that experience for you? Let's go ahead and use the chat box. You can send it to me by clicking on the little down arrow next to everyone and sending it to the host, or you can send it to everybody. How was that experience for you, both in the bigger group with me and also in the smaller groups? Just love to know what your experience was like. Great talking to other people, fantastic. Good to hear how other people are coping. Great, glad you were sharing things. Great, I just started to realize that I use chocolate as a coping mechanism. Just make sure it's dark chocolate. It's healthy for you, I've heard somewhere. It's like vitamins. Great tips. I love dark chocolate. It releases oxytocin. It makes us feel happy. That's right. That's right, it is good. What else? You can send it to just me if you want to say, I totally hated that, and I hate you for even making me talk about it. Like, it doesn't always have to be positive experiences. Some people might even feel stress talking about their stress. I'm glad having a feeling of community has helped you. Appreciate the ideas, knowing others are experiencing the same. Absolutely, right? That's one of the things I love about these sessions is people get a chance to be together. It's amazing. Can't wait to see more of these kinds of videos. Not much awareness in the business world in terms of mental health. This is true, yes. Hopefully there's a topic about overthinking and anxiety. I think I did. I think my second one, they were recorded, so you can go back if you click on that link that Q put in there about the previous ones. All but one were recorded. So you can watch them through, and there were good resources accompanying them. Oh, thanks. Q just put a link in. That's if for you to share feedback about the session. So you can do that. Click on it now and then do that at the end. Taking naps, fantastic, love it. So petting animals, yeah, perfect. Oh, and there's the other link. Thank you, Q. That's for the previous sessions. You can see there was some stuff in there about anxiety. Not necessarily overthinking, but distorted thinking, which can also be in an overthinking capacity, but not always, but distorted thinking. All right, let me move on so that we have enough time for everything. So in all of the sessions, I do the mindfulness practice, but I also do a self-care portion. And so today I want to talk about boundary setting, because boundary setting is integral to stress in our lives, because oftentimes the stress we're experiencing in our lives is because people are asking us to do things that we don't have time for, or we don't have an interest in, or we don't have enough information about something, right? So there's a lot of reasons why. And so with boundary setting, what you need to keep in mind about that is there's several steps, so to speak, about boundary setting. So the first thing we have to do is we have to be able to identify what are our boundaries. And typically, we're not raised in homes where we see around us the healthy expression of boundaries, right? So we might have people that don't have good emotional boundaries, don't have good financial boundaries, don't have good physical boundaries. And so boundaries are something that aren't innate. We have to learn them. And if we didn't learn them growing up, we have to learn them now. And so the ability to identify what our boundaries are, typically the way we identify them is because somebody's crossed our boundary. And how do we know they crossed our boundary? Because we're mad at them. We're upset that they've done something, right? That's a boundary that they've crossed over. So we have to identify our boundaries. And to do this, we have to be able to determine, well, what are our values? You know, what do we value? What is our worldview? What are our morals, our moral foundation, right? So the best way to identify what our boundaries are is to identify what our values in life are. And so there's really good resources on the internet for, you could just do a simple internet search. It's like, what are my core values? And it'll run you through a quick little quiz or something, or give you a list of like 500 words and you pick them out. That's how I remember doing it. But we can start simple, right, with boundary setting, because it's not easy. Setting boundaries in our lives can sometimes completely disrupt our entire setup emotionally, socially. Setting boundaries with family members can bring up so much conflict. Setting boundaries at work can cause a lot of problems. And setting boundaries in our relationships can cause a lot of issues. So we want to start simple, right? Not just go right out of the gate with some major boundary setting. So one of the things you can do for yourself about boundary setting, right? Start with yourself, is do something like remove notifications from your cell phone so that you don't feel like you constantly have to check it, right? It's like, before we can set boundaries on other people, we need to be able to set boundaries for ourselves. We need to know what they are and how to set them for ourselves, And from there, we can extend out to other people. So setting boundaries for yourself is maybe making sure that you're getting enough sleep, and make sure that you're getting enough water, right? Enough hydration in your day, right? So setting those kind of physical, nutritional, time management boundaries in your life. You know, listen to how you're feeling about things. If you're in an environment and you feel like your heart rate is increasing, you're starting to maybe sweat, or you're feeling tightness in your chest, or a little weirdness in your stomach, like that unsettled feeling, these are signs that you're in discomfort, and it might be because your boundaries are being violated. You might not be cognitively aware of it, but you might be physiologically or physically in your body aware of it. That's right. Drink more water. I agree. Barbara and I seem to be on a similar wavelength with all this stuff. Water, sleep, good. No alcohol before bed. All right. Learning to say no. Typically, when people think of setting boundaries, this is almost where people start. Setting a boundary is telling people, no, stop, get away, right? It's like putting your hands up to the physical boundaries. So the ability to say no And we don't have to say no sometimes by even saying the word no. We can find other ways to do that. So boundary setting by saying no without saying the word no might look something like, let's see, let me follow up with you in an email. I have to look at my calendar first, right? So you're going, right? You're giving yourself a chance to disengage from the person. You're going to go look at your calendar. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But what you're going to do is give yourself, so you don't feel the pressure to respond in the moment with no, right? And then you go back and say, actually, I have time for some part of that, but not all of it. You can say a partial no, right? So there are a lot of different ways to say no. We have to be able to recognize what our boundaries are. Then we have to set those boundaries with people, which requires assertiveness. And so that doesn't come easy to a lot of people. A lot of people are either very passive or very aggressive or passive aggressive, and assertive is not any of those things, right? So we don't want to be cruel. We don't want to be insensitive to people. Assertiveness basically means that we're just stating what we want, what we need in a very clear manner. That means we don't beat around the bush. We have to be very clear with people, but we're not doing it in an unkind or insensitive way. Deleting social media could be a great way to set healthy boundaries. Absolutely. I don't have any social media at all, so I definitely agree with that. We also have to set consequences, right? We have to let people know that if you violate my boundaries, there are consequences for that. And so that is a very difficult, right? So you have to identify them, establish them, hold them, right? Hold them. And now we have to give people consequences when they violate our boundaries. Oftentimes a person violates our boundaries, but we've never communicated to them clearly that that is a boundary for us. And then they have consequences. We punish them. So we should be able to tell people directly what our boundaries are. And then when they violate those boundaries, have consequences for them, letting them know that they've overstepped and that you are dissatisfied with that, and that you would like them to please never do that again, right? However, whatever it is. But we have to be consistent. Consistency is actually key to all boundaries, because if you grew up in one of those homes where you could go to mom versus dad, or dad versus mom, or uncle versus grandma, or something like that to get what you wanted, then you were raised in an environment with inconsistent boundaries and inconsistent rules. And that's actually a very unhealthy environment to grow up in, because kids need to learn consistency and what rules are and how to set boundaries. And so that's how we learn them, is when other people do that. We can seek support, right? Because one, it's not going to be easy to set boundaries, or it's not going to be easy to hold them and hold people accountable when they violate our boundaries. So we might need to seek out support from other people. Doesn't have to be a therapist, can be a friend, a coworker, a family member, somebody that you feel like you can talk to about the struggles you're having with asserting your boundaries, or establishing your boundaries, holding your boundaries, things like this. There's no shame in seeking any kind of help, whether it's professional or what they call intra-professional, right? Maybe it's a group setting, something like that. We can all greatly benefit from the feedback from our peers. As a lot of you said, right? You went into those discussion groups and you really liked that people were sharing. You felt like you weren't alone. You were learning new coping mechanisms. So that's what can happen when we seek out support. I want to just briefly touch on in our personal romantic relationships, right? Our partners, our spouses, the people that we are in the most intimate relationships with. They can be quite taxing. This is where a lot of our boundary issues can come up. And this is also where burnout can get played out. If we have a burnout kind of situation in our lives from our work, then we might be taking that burnout, out on our family members, or vice versa, right? So just to be careful and be attentive to making sure that you have good, healthy boundaries at home, that you're not in a situation where people are mistreating you. And if they are, please do seek, professional assistance with that, because that's a type of boundary that we need to be really attentive to, are those personal boundaries within our homes. So let me go back. I want to see what somebody put in the chat box about, I got to make the box bigger. Sorry for that. All right. So Lee says, if you can't say no to a task, especially at work, give yourself extra time If you can do it in one day, say you'll have it done in 3. That's right. Gives you some flexibility to work the task on your terms while also setting better expectations for delivery time in the future. Fantastically. Also helps plan for unexpected things. Yes, very, very good. And like roadblocks and system failures, Barbara really likes that and says, seek support now before you need outside support. It's cheaper. It is. It is. And sometimes we can't get the kind of support from our peer support that we can get from a professional. So sometimes people might actually need that. But yes, absolutely. So we have some time remaining, which I'm very happy about. So I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to just hear more people's thoughts on boundary setting. I'm going to look into my chat box. What else would people like to either know about boundary setting, or what would you like to say about how boundary setting has been helpful for you in your life? Reiterating again that deleting social media, absolutely. I usually say, do you want me to stop working on Y so I can do the next task X? Absolutely. That's a way of saying no without saying the word no, right? Absolutely. I can do this, or I can do this and this, but what's the priority? I can't do both. That's right. Setting boundaries provides relief for me. Fantastic. Yeah, it's a very, very helpful skill set to have, a strategy to use, but it's very difficult. For a lot of people, I set boundaries, but sometimes I feel guilty. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would imagine some of that might have to do with the fact that people don't like you setting boundaries and maybe might be challenging them a little bit. People don't like us setting boundaries. I've had to set limits on a friend's venting when it became too filled with anger. Good for you. To say I can't absorb that level of anger, but I'm happy to talk through something constructively. Yes, very tough. But it's exhausting listening to venting. So I understand that. Unfortunately, had to block my mom, narcissism and harassment. Yeah, very difficult. Absolutely. I didn't talk to my mom for about 5 years, many, many years ago. Similar kind of situation with my mom. I was just sort of like, you know what, if she wasn't my mother and she was just some like friend in my life, would I allow this kind of behavior? And I thought, no. So why am I allowing it from my mother? Done. Done for about 5 years. Had to ask my son if he wanted me to do what he wanted me to do is more important than my job that pays home and bills instead of, he supporting you. Very good. Mother came to therapy with you, unfortunately didn't resolve, just establish how far apart we are. Yeah. Yes, family therapy can be very, very difficult, especially if the individuals in the family aren't in individual therapy at the same time. Sometimes people need individual therapy before they're ready for couples or family therapy. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, and I hear about that all the time. Always loved helping people, but I started saying no, felt bad, but it had to be done for my sanity, make sure I could finish my task. Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to take care of us. Any tips on dealing with the guilt that comes from setting boundaries and saying no? Good question. That came to me privately. Well, interestingly enough, I think that setting a boundary on accepting guilt can actually work, right? Because when people are sending us signals that we're not doing what they want us to do, we're disrupting some sort of family dynamic by setting up a boundary, because typically guilt is coming, we're getting the message somehow. We don't have to, like sort of buy into it, but I want to see what other people are also saying. Clear communication about boundaries is key. Seek support from friends and partners. So yeah, so seeking support, reassuring me that my boundaries, right? You have to reassure yourself that what we have to make sure is that we're not establishing such rigid boundaries that we're making people scale over, a monumental wall. So we need to be careful with our boundary setting. I didn't say that, I apologize, right? So sometimes we go from being very lenient to then all of a sudden being very restrictive. And those are not going to work. But sometimes we have to pendulum swing to then find our sense of balance with, we don't want to force people to scale up an unscalable wall to reach us, but we also don't want to just become like a carpet that gets laid out for everybody to walk on, right? We have to find that middle place. But if people are used to being able to walk on us like a carpet, they're not going to like us establishing even a little fence. So just know that people are going to react to that. So people are saying they had to put some distance between themselves. Regarding the guilt, I asked what I would tell a friend who was feeling guilty about setting boundaries. Excellent. So you have a little dialogue with yourself. What would I say to a friend? That's also an act of self-compassion. How do you respond to your friend's distress? How do you respond to your own? If you're kinder and gentler and more compassionate with your friend than you are with yourself, you can learn how to be more self-compassionate. Somebody's saying, what kind of consequences can you impose on somebody who keeps violating your boundaries? You can, it can escalate, right? You can basically let them know, this is my boundary. You have to be very clear with people. This is how you violated it or crossed over, whatever kind of language you want to use. This is how I'd like things to go from here on out. And then next time it happens, then the consequence goes from like the verbal to then maybe, it just depends on what the relationship is with the person. So it's hard to talk in specifics like that. It might be that there's a break in your being around that person. Maybe you might have to take a break from them, right? In a short period, like a short little break. And then every time they do it again, it may be a longer break. And then you have to decide for yourself, what's the end point? At one point, do you say, okay, that's it. This person is not getting it, right? Is not getting it at all. And then you have to make really tough decisions like people have already been mentioning and just sever relationships. Sometimes that's what we end up having to do, is sever relationships. He's saying you can't control other people's actions. You can control and limit their access to you. Fantastic. That's exactly right. Some things have gone by while I've been talking, so let me just quickly. Clear communication. Somebody's saying they put some distance between them and their whole family. Yeah, worked in therapy to realize that they don't have healthy relationships. There you go. For some people, they get into therapy. Need to have a friend that can reassure you that you're doing what's good for you. That's right. Reminding someone that we love them, and at the same time, we have to take care of ourselves. That's right. So we can show up for them the way that will be best for both of us. Exactly. Right. It's I mean, it's gotten a little, it's overused now, but it's so clear, right? That announcement that you hear when before the plane's going to take off, and they tell you, if you're a parent or traveling with somebody who needs extra help, that you put on your oxygen mask before you put on their oxygen mask. Like it just goes in one ear and out the other at this point in time, but it's so very true, right? Boundary setting is self-care. Self-care is necessary in order to be able to care for others. And most of us do want to take care of others. People are saying, thanks for the advice. Thanks for welcome. I made a mistake at work and was really beating myself up about it. When talking to a friend, she asked me, what would you tell me if I had done this and not you, right? Absolutely. There's that self-compassion. Think we often default to accepting people's opinions as truth. But that's up to you to discern. Absolutely. Absolutely. Truth is subjective. It sure is. Like to plug an amazing book. Okay, so what's Emily got here? Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. It does have quoted biblical scriptures here and there, but still so applicable and amazing messages, even if not Christian. Thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate that. I'm actually a seminary graduate, so I like things that have scripture. Set boundaries, find peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself. Fantastic. Another book. These are great. Thank you so much, people, for that. Putting some resources in. Often others' reaction to us is mainly about them and not about us. Absolutely. Yeah, almost entirely, right? Learning to love myself has helped immensely with boundary setting. Fantastic. I'm very happy to hear that. Talking from my emotions and how people's actions make me feel, that's something anyone can debate. Yeah. Yes, I like that. Before I forget, I do want to just advance one slide because you can, those of you who have those newfangled phones, I think you can aim your camera at this. I'm just being silly, I know what it is, QR code. So you snap a picture and that will take you to that feedback survey. There's also a link for it. Thank you, Q, in the chat box. Either way, if you want to be fancy and take a camera shot or click on a link, either one. Either one. I finally got a phone where I can actually do that. I can actually do QR codes. I couldn't do it before. People are always like, you're such a grandpa. You don't know how to do the QR codes. I'm like, I actually don't want to do it. I'm like, I want to be old and not aware of these things. Please let us know if you want us to host more of these sessions in the future. Absolutely. Please do let Out and Equal know about that. Please do. Any final thoughts, comments? And thank you for those of you who have been with me all or most of these sessions. I want to say thank you. It has been a true joy to be able to present these ideas and these strategies and tools to you. This is what I do. This is my full-time job, so to speak. I do emotional wellness and personal growth workshops for corporate clients. And so it's amazing. And the one of the things I love about it is it's a constant reminder for me. I cannot not do my self-care because it's all I'm talking about all day, every day. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to also take care of me so that I could take care of you. And now you could take care of you so you could take care of others in whatever way that is for you. And if you're new, if you just came into this one final session, I'm so glad that you were able to be here. And I hope that you can go back by click on the link that Hugh gave you to be able to see the prior sessions that were all recorded except the last one, the conflict management one. You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody. Yes, I am on LinkedIn, Q. Thanks for letting people know. It is my only social media. It's barely social media, but it's becoming a little bit more like Facebook. So I'm liking it less and less now. But yes, I am on LinkedIn. Please do look for me there. Thank you, everybody, for all of the feedback. I appreciate all of the kudos and the thanks and the appreciations. I really do. I hope that you are able to apply some of these stress management and coping mechanisms into your daily life to reduce the stress in your life and also reduce the stressors and the stress as it accumulates on our bodies. We can take better care of ourselves. Yes, thank you, Q. You're quick with those links. I love it. Thank you. You're welcome, everybody. Thank you. And we are now at the top of the hour. Bye, everybody.